Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here today. As you can see, it's quite a while ago I was a young PhD student, and pretty much the, whatever it is, 35 years since then I've spent in the world of industrial biotechnology. So I'm sufficiently old to have a lot of stories to tell about what industrial biotechnology was before the word was ever invented. Those are very boring stories, so I won't talk about that. I'll try to take you into what I think is the future of industrial biotechnology. Novozymes is and I'll spare you for all the corporate slides, so don't worry. But Novozymes is we consider ourselves a leader in industrial biotech. We've been around really for 5 decades, and today we're about half of the world market for industrial biotech, so what we call white biotech. Our main product line is in industrial enzymes, but also in different microorganisms. Today we are roughly a 12-13 billion euro market cap company, so a mid-sized European company. That also tells you a bit about the sector. The sector itself is actually not that large yet. It's been growing. We have grown as a company. We've grown about 7% organically every year since 1990. So it's a fast growing compared to a lot of other segments. It's a fast growing area, but it's still a niche in many ways. So what I wanted to do today is to kind of try to set the scene for how industrial biotechnology, in my mind at least, has some of the solutions that we're crying out for in this world. It doesn't obviously have all the solutions, but it has some of the solutions, and I'll try to make that point as I make my way through this presentation. But let me just try to set the scene first. So in not too long, not too far off, we're going to be 9.7 billion people on this planet. That's the 2050 projection by the United Nations. That's projection, so you can always debate whether the numbers are precisely right. I've seen anything between 9 and 10 billion. I don't think that's the point here at all. The point is that we're going to be a lot more people than we are today. That is in itself a kind of a stunning thing that we're going to be 9.7 billion. And it's actually one of the few things that is a pretty safe bet. We're going to be 9.7 billion come hell or high water. The other thing that's actually even more dramatic is that we're going to see an urbanization that we have never, ever seen yet. We think we have seen cities travel to London, travel to Paris, travel to Tokyo, but we haven't seen anything yet. There's 4 billion people over the next 15 years that are going to move into cities. That corresponds to building about 10 Tokyos every year. Just think about the requirements on infrastructure that's going to put on us. Think about the requirements on how we live as individuals, how we let ourselves transport as individuals. It's going to be a massive change. And it's not going to happen over 150 years. It's going to happen over 15 years. And it will happen. It is happening. It's just not happening in our part of the world, but it's happening. The other thing that I find quite interesting is that while we're talking about these growth challenges, we actually still have 1 billion people on this planet who has no access to energy. While we have a problem of climate change because of CO2 emissions, we have 1 billion people that have no access to energy except for the firewood they cut in the local forest. So the world is getting flatter in many ways, but it's also getting extremely diverse. So while we want to solve, if you like, the excess problems that we have in our part of the world, there's 1 billion who's not anywhere close getting to the party yet. So we cannot just solve these issues by all deciding that we're going to consume a bit less. There's about 4 billion people who are very eager to get to our party. And there doesn't exist a solution that doesn't bring them to the party. That's their primary care about, and they'll make sure they get to the party. That's a phenomenal challenge that we have in front of us. And again, did we have 150 years to solve these challenges? I'm sure technologies would find solutions. Now we have maybe 15 or 20 or 30 years to find these solutions. And that's why it's so important to get to an event like this one and talk about how can technologies then, how can we accelerate this, and how can we speed it up? In many of these areas, when you look at the consumption that we as human beings are putting on the planet, then it's just about doubling over the next 35 years. One thing that we in Novozymes take a specific interest in is food production. Not that we're involved in food production, but we're involved in a lot of the auxiliaries of food production. So in 2050, according again to the FAO, to the United Nations, we're going to produce about 70% more food than we did in 2013. Now, 70% more food is an awful lot. It actually means, I'm not sure it's that descriptive, but it means that farmers between now and 2050 will produce more food than they did in the period over the last 10,000 years. So over these 35 years, 34 years, they will produce more food than they did in the previous 10,000 years. So 70% more food is a horrendous, it's a real significant challenge. It's not like climate change is helping us. It's not like urbanization is helping us. There'll actually be less farmland to produce this 70% more food on. That is a phenomenal challenge. And of course, one of the 17 sustainable development goals of the United Nations that was approved this last September. 70% more food. I'm sure farmers will make it. The question is, can we make it in a sustainable way? Can we make it in a way where this becomes sustainable operation? The last number I just wanted to bring to your attention is the simple 2/3. And I wasn't thinking about the 2/3 of diseases that are untreated, but I was thinking about 2/3 of the world's teenagers. They live in Asia. That means that while we're doing all these things, everything really centers around Asia. 2/3 of the consumers of tomorrow, they live in Asia. That's why when you look at all the companies that you are associated with, all the companies I'm working with, associated with, they have their focus on Asia. So while we solve these issues, we need to keep Asia and of course some of the other emerging markets at the center because it's really there, it's happening. That means that companies like the one I'm representing have to kind of change. We have a lot of our research going on in the matured part of the world. We have to organize ourselves to become much more Asian and Latin American because that's where you have the future, that's where you have the future consumption. Now, the most significant challenge we have, I think, is climate change. Not because in its nature is most significant, but because the speed by which we need to do something about it has to really, really increase. If you look at the reports coming out of the International Energy Agency in Paris, then we have to reduce and decline, or make a reduction in our CO2 emissions already in this decade. We have to be CO2 neutral by 2050, and we cannot emit any CO2 between 2050 and 2100. If we do that, then we can keep the temperature increase at 2 degrees C over pre-industrial. Right now, we're tracking towards 4.5 degrees C over pre-industrial. So we don't have 10 or 20 years to solve these problems. We have to get going at it right now. And while Paris probably was a great event with 188 countries that came together and actually made an agreement with at least an agreement to follow up by 2020. When I look at what the world is doing in terms of implementing technologies that actually do exist today to reduce CO2 emission, it's not impressive at all. So when you look at gaps, as is the theme of this conference, that's a very significant gap. Technologies actually do exist, not only biotechnologies. But in general, if we look at the CO2 mitigation that needs to happen to stay below 2 degrees C, well, then we actually have about 2/3 of these technologies available today. We just don't use it. While we are excited about climate change and we want to deal with it, at the same time, we're so scared about actually using the tools that would deal with it. And one of the things that certainly is a factor of life is that when you look at the previous century, then one of the most successful industrial arms of the previous century was the fossil fuel companies. They have very, very deep pockets. This may very well be the century of biotechnology and smart battery technology and digital technology, but the pockets were filled in the fossil fuel companies in the previous century, and they do everything they can to put a sledge to put a stone on the road so we don't get there, because they are not that keen on making it. If you go back to the International Energy Agency in Paris again, then only 2/3 of what's on the balance sheets of these companies today can be burned in this century. So they already have more carbon on their balance sheets today, discovered carbon, than we'll be able to burn over the next, in this century, so over the next 85 years. Let me fast forward to biotechnology. So biotech has a lot of has some of the answers. Actually, when you look at how we consume oil, then our vision is that biotech will be able to replace oil to a large extent. Farmers can grow. There's a lot of waste in farming. And actually, you may think farm and forest waste is not that significant, but it is. According to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is one of these analyst institutes, we can actually cover about 50% of the expected gasoline consumption by 2030 with only 17% of the available agricultural waste. So the sun and plants, it's such a phenomenal producer of energy and store it in terms of biomass that can be used for not only fueling, but also for using it for a lot of other materials. So in a second, you're going to see a car. So fuel can be based on biotech, plant biotech, biotechnology that converts, enzyme technology that converts the biomass into sugars, and then the sugar platform can be used for a lot of different things. We have been involved in this now for the last 15 years. I think we put about 300 million euros into developing the enzyme systems that breaks down the cellulose in a commercially relevant setting. We have learned so much about how nature breaks down cellulose over the last 10 years that there's a couple of textbooks that will need rewriting. But once you have the sugar platform, there's so many other things you can do. The sugar platform then just becomes a new, if you like, oil. Then you can go to chemicals, you can go to all kinds of things. So you can imagine a world where you can actually replace an awful lot of the fossil fuels with something that's derived from waste. Now, at an oil price of $20 a barrel, this is not happening. So unless we as citizens of this world find a way of increasing the cost of the CO2 pollution emission, then this is not going to happen at the current oil prices. All these programs are pretty much at bay right now. They're not moving. They're not moving at all because the oil prices are so low that you cannot make a good investment case. So when you look at Novozymes, I would say some of this is actually happening. When you look at and again, we're about half of the industrial biotech market. When you look at our customers, and we actually document that through life cycle analysis, when you look at our customers, then we save about 60 million tons of CO2 every year. That corresponds to about 25 million cars. It's not saving the world, but it's certainly a good contribution, and it just proves that when you think about all these small additions, I think the way you want to think about sustainability is not that one thing solves it all. It's the sum of an awful lot of small things that's going to solve our problem. So just Novozymes and the use of our products is about 25 million cars. That's significant. If you look at some of the areas that actually adds a lot, the first one I'm not sure you would even think of, but that's laundry. It's biotechnology that's taking wash temperatures down. It's biotechnology that is the dream of all the big laundry companies. They want to go to tap water washing. Now, a 10 degrees C drop in Europe only corresponds to all the German nuclear power plants. So that corresponds to about the 8 nuclear power plants that the Germans took out. So it's a significant part. It's a significant part of what we use in our households. That actually goes into laundering because we heat the water. That's all enzyme technology. Some of the most sophisticated enzyme technology of this world is actually in your laundry machine. And with today's technologies, where we can, of course, based on all the stuff that you guys have been doing and people before you, we can actually we screen like millions of enzymes per month. So we use artificial evolution. We create enzymes. We have a phenomenal screening capacity. So in today's world, we design enzyme systems that fits uniquely to a Persil or to an Omo or to a Tide, and does a particular job with their backbone in their detergent. And the primary care about, of course, is cleanliness, but it's also to take wash temperatures down, because that really, really matters when it comes to the energy consumption in households. Another more mundane area is food and beverage, where enzyme or biotechnology is used in a number of ways to, if you like, create more with less. That's one of the areas that if we want to produce 70% more, then a part of the equation, 70% more food, a part of the equation is to get better use of the raw materials. And I'll spare you for all the details, but there's a ton of things you can do there, but actually in particular when you get to the emerging markets. And then our dear friend in biofuels, that is a part of the industrial biotech market today. The Americans, they run about 10% of their miles on biofuels. That is a significant business. They convert corn into ethanol, which is then used in cars, with a roughly 50%, 50, 60, 70% CO2 mitigation on the 10%. That is a main contributor to the CO2 savings that I talked about before. And then last but not least, we have a major effort in bioag. People have known for decades, centuries maybe, that particular microorganisms with the plant would promote growth. And we are now industrializing that. So last year, together with Monsanto, we did 500,000 field trials with 2,000 unique microbes in the Americas on corn and soy. We see improvements of yield to the tune of somewhere between 2 and 15%. Now, if we can just deliver on this, let's say 6 or 7% on average, then that technology on its own, the right microbiology around the seed when it goes into the ground, that technology on its own can deliver on 1/10 of the food challenge that we have going forward. That's a major undertaking we're doing now, and we expect to have those products, products are in the market. There'll be second generation products coming to the market next year, but the big blast is going to be in 19 and 20, where we think we can really make an impact. So when we go back to Novozymes then, or to industrial biotech, then these are some pretty mundane areas we're into today. It is actually if you like, in terms of the technology, it's moving incredibly fast. I mentioned the 2,000 unique microbes that we're putting in the ground in 500,000 field trials. Those are selected amongst, I think, about 12,000 microbes where we did a full genome. So in just a couple of months, a company like Novozymes do like 10 to 15,000 bacterial genomes. Now, only, 10 years ago, we were involved in the first bacterial genome program. I think it took like 6 years. It cost a fortune, and today we can do it at $1, and you get it in 20 minutes. So it's an amazing technological development, and you know a lot more about that than I do. What I know is that it creates the possibility for a company like us and other companies to actually present a forceful package of technology to solve some of these issues, including the one in bioag. So let me just get back to the main theme again, sustainability. These are the challenges. The world has a lot of other challenges, but they all stem from the fact that we'll be more people, we'll be wealthier, we'll consume more. And just if you want to have a rough number in the back of your mind, then doubling consumption from now till 2050, I don't think is a bad one. That puts an enormous pressure on citizens, on companies to make sustainable offerings. So in my company, we have simply taken the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations that they approved in September, and we've said, okay, where can we make a difference? On which of these 17 can we make a difference? And we picked out some of them where we can make a difference. The largest hit we have is on renewable energy, and it's on increasing and improving food production. Those are the two main energy efficiency. Those are the 2/3 main areas where we can make a difference. And we put that into our purpose. And I just want to close off with this one. There's this colorful slide, and I'll let you read it, but this colorful slide is our way of describing sustainability. Now, a company has a purpose statement to direct itself. And we use this one to direct ourselves. It has a couple of key elements to it. It has biology, which kind of defines the company. We're all about biology. But then it also has a word up in front, together. And that's because we realized that over the last 10 plus years, that there's no way that a company on its own can do it. These challenges are so large that the best you can do is to be a part of a chain that delivers a solution. So we do it with other entities, not only commercial entities like I referenced on bioag, but certainly also with political forces. Again, if you think about temperature, if you think about climate change and CO2 mitigation, I would put to you that that's not a technological challenge. It's a political challenge. It's all about the policies. So I actually spent probably about a third of my time I spent on the political arena to try to present to politicians that solutions do exist. And of course, I can talk about renewable fuels with some credibility, but other people will talk about windmill turbines and other things, battery technologies and so on. Technologies do exist. It's not a technological issue at all. It's a political issue. So together is important up there. And the other part that's important is the small, let's rethink tomorrow. We invite, and I would say with some success, we invite customers, partners all over the world to participate in not only making marginal changes, but to rethink. And of course, our hope is that often you get to choose a biotech solution by doing so. Because Novozymes is a company. When you think about a company, then people do not get to work in Novozymes because they want to create shareholder value. They don't care about shareholder value. What they care about is making a difference. They care about doing something for the world. That's where you drive out the passion and the energy. Now, in order to sustain that model, you also need to run a business. And I would argue that if you can help solve some of the major issues that this world has, then you also have a good business. And that's what we have put together here. And that's what Novozymes is trying to comprise, that we, on the one side, is a business, but we make a business out of being sustainable. And biotech has a lot of the solutions. It doesn't have them all, but it has a lot of the solutions. I'm getting the word now, so I'm going to stop here. But it's very encouraging to be here today and to talk to you last night also. I think there's so much, there's such a burst of technology coming through here that it would be a pity if we didn't make good use of it when we solve these issues. Thank you very much. And I think there is time for a couple of questions if there are any. There's one over there.
Hi, great talk. I'm Max, PhD student from Germany. You just said biotech has a lot of the solutions. You claim that biofuels might be one of the solutions. I have talked to some people who work on drop-in biofuels, and they actually, although they don't, of course, tell this to the people who give them the money, they say this is not actually going to happen. They might come up with good strategies and technologies, but in the end they will produce high-value chemicals, but because they can never compete with the petrol industry. Do you think this is a solution that will come from biotechnology, or will this be, I don't know, solar technology, for example?
It's a very good question, and it's complicated. I would, just to make it short here, I think there's only one way to make our current transportation practice less CO2 emitting, and that is biofuels. Electrical cars will have a role to play, and I'm not here to say what role that's going to be by 2040, 2050. I think battery technology will move very, very fast. But for the next 30 years, there's no other solution. And transportation fuel makes up 25% of our total CO2 emission. So there's no way of reaching the Paris agreements unless you deal with transportation, and there's only one way to do it. Now, your question was, I don't know whether you realize that, but you talk about drop-in fuels, and that's slightly different. Because if you put on the challenge that you want to have a simple drop-in fuel like butanol, then you actually have a fairly expensive solution that you're proposing. I think the winner is just very simple ethanol, and we'll have to make use of, or we'll have to deal with some of the logistical challenges that ethanol provokes, because it's not a drop-in fuel, but it's really inexpensive. And ethanol has been cheaper than gasoline for the last 13 years in the USA, and is still cheaper than gasoline. The Europeans are getting this wrong, the Americans are getting it right, but that's a whole totally different story.
Can you talk a little bit about the constraint of water in biofuels? I know this is commonly comes up with particularly corn, but any of the biomass-based fuel that you consume a tremendous amount of water to produce these things. And do you think that that's something that can be technically solved by a better enzyme or a better microbe?
Well, the water is an issue, of course, and in particular in corn. And I'm not here to suggest that we would just, or that anyone should just blindly grow more corn to fuel our cars. I think, again, America is a particular place with corn, and they can grow corn very effectively. The rest of the world will have to do with biomass, with waste. And that waste has been produced anyhow. The actual processing from waste till ethanol can be almost water-free, water neutral. So actually the plant there's 7 plants operating now, and they're pretty much water neutral, all of them, because you reuse the water. But of course you can speculate that, and again, that's where the policy gets to play, that you would increase farming because of this, and then you'd use more water, and it gets very complicated. But what I think we need to keep in our mind is that it actually offers a solution that does not, at least if you do it wisely, does not consume water. It offers a solution that has a CO2 mitigation of 90–95% if you use the ag waste. So my simple plea to politicians is that, I mean, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. I'm not suggesting that biofuels in any way is perfect. It's just the only thing we have right now, and it's pretty good. It's certainly better than oil. I don't know whether we can take one more maybe, then we'll close up.
Sorry if I didn't understand you before, but if you let farmers grow corn for biofuel, the land will compete with farmers who grow food for people. So the price of food will increase, which is, I assume, why the Europeans maybe are not so keen on the idea. It's like if we decided now all the farming land around Cambridge was allowed to be built, everyone could have 2 or 3 houses, and that could be a problem for some people.
It's a really complicated issue, and you can have conferences running for a week dealing with this subject. Of course, you're right that if American farmers use more acreage to grow corn, they'll displace some soybeans. I'm not suggesting that we should do that. I'm suggesting that we should use the biomass, so use the corn stovers, use the wheat straw. So I'm not suggesting that you just take out farmland. I'm suggesting that you make intelligent use of the waste that you're creating anyhow. And that doesn't create more pressure on farming. Actually, it's going to give farmers a second income. And if you can I allow myself closing on more of a political statement, then you actually create jobs in, for example, Europe, and not in the refineries in the Middle East. So the job creation happens locally. But Europe has a totally different play from the US. The US has low-price carbohydrates. Europe doesn't have that capacity because we have deselected GMO technology. So Europe should never go down a grain route. Europe should use biomass. Thank you very much.